Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm going to try to dye resin doll parts for the first time. I've been reading about this for months, and I'm excited to give it a try, so let's see what happens. The first thing I'm going to do is prepare the pieces for dyeing by sanding the surface of the resin. That means I'll be wearing my respirator. Mine's a 3M 6001, as you can see, and it's a NIOSH approved OVP95 filter, which means it filters both dust and resin fumes. Very important for a project like this. I'll wear gloves to keep my hands clean too, and do wet sanding to minimize the dust. I'm using non-clogging 3M wet or dry sandpaper for this in 2 grits, 150 for the rougher sanding, and 600 to smooth it out afterward. From my understanding, you're supposed to start with sanding the resin so that the pieces will be uniformly porous. I could have had these pieces made in green, but since I'd like to dye one of my other more expensive dolls at some point, I thought some practice would be a good idea. After all the pieces are sanded, I prepare them for dyeing by running a string through each piece. That way I can hold them in the dye bath. Some people like to hang them and just leave them there while they're dyeing, but I'll want to pull them up and check the color frequently, so holding them seems like a better idea for me. All tied up and ready to go, so let's head to the kitchen. Since I've never tried to dye doll parts before, I figured I would start by testing the dye bath with an extra hand. It's not the same color, but resin is resin, so it should all be the same, right? This is a plain white urethane resin, just like what doll companies use. Rhyllyn's legs are a flesh tone, so they'll come out a little darker than this piece, but this should give me a decent idea of whether or not the dye bath is ready. When the water is just starting to boil, I pour in half a bottle of Dymorph for synthetics, then add a squirt of dish soap, which is supposed to help the dye take more evenly. I want the water to stay at this temperature, but I don't want a vigorously rolling boil or I might get splattered with hot water, and that would not be fun. Once the dye is good and stirred, I dunk in the hand to test with and keep it moving since it's a little long. I don't want this to touch the metal or the resin might get damaged. The pot I'm using is stainless steel, which is important since it's a non-reactive metal and won't cause any weird chemical reactions. I've dyed fabric in stainless steel pots hundreds of times, so I know this won't cause any weird reactions with the dye. After 5 minutes of swirling, I pull it out and dip it in cold water to rinse and cool it. And, okay, is it just me or is this not green at all? It's a really beautiful teal blue and actually looks kind of pearlescent, but this isn't what I expected. Maybe it's because I didn't use the whole dye bottle? The color's really uniform though, which is what I want. So I'll dump in the rest of the dye, and hopefully that'll make it a little more green. Judging by a few drops on a paper towel, this is much closer to the rich green I'm aiming for. So now it's time to try the legs. I dip them in, set a timer, and keep them moving, just like the hand. And after 5 minutes, alright, that is not what I expected. Unlike the hand, these hardly took any color at all. Maybe I didn't leave them in long enough? Well, I'll do the other pieces and then have another look. After 5 minutes in the dye, I'm a little nervous about how this is turning out. These pieces are really streaky and uneven, and they don't seem to be picking up much color at all. This time I think I'm gonna be here a while. I ended up putting them in for 6 more cycles, 5 minutes each, meaning that they spent more than half an hour in boiling dye. And after all that time, these pieces aren't any darker at all. It worked so well on the hand. I would have thought that no matter the company, doll parts would take dye pretty much the same. I guess that's not the case. I'm out of ideas for darkening this, so I scoop some near boiling dye into a bowl and cover the parts. I'll let them sit there until the dye is cool. At this point, it can't make things any worse. After sitting in the dye for hours, they didn't pick up any more color at all. It's still super pale, really streaky and blotchy, and way more blue than green. Ugh. The only way to get the dye back off is sanding the parts again. How frustrating. I've heard it can be harder to dye some dolls than others, depending on the company and what the resin is textured like. But I didn't anticipate this kind of trouble, especially not after sanding all the parts at the beginning. I guess I'll have to experiment some more. But that's one good lesson to take away from this experience, I guess. I've dyed things a million times before, just never a doll. Turns out, even when you know how to do something, and you study it thoroughly and give it your best shot, it can still go really wrong. I'll have to do a little more brainstorming on how I'm gonna get this done. Maybe a different brand of dye would work better for this doll? I don't know. But that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.